Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian. Today I am taking a look at Savage 45 caliber pistols. Now of course most people are familiar with the fact that Savage was one of the primary competitors to the Colt/Browning automatic pistol, which eventually was adopted as the model of 1911, which everyone is familiar with today. Well, the initial pistol trials that led to the adoption of the 1911 were held in 1907, and there were about a half a dozen different significant serious entrants into those competitions, and only 3 of them came out as really being approved or reviewed in a positive light by the U.S. Ordnance Board. Those were the Colt Browning, the Luger in .45, and the Savage in .45. This pistol was designed by a fellow named Edward Searle, S-E-A-R-L-E, and he was working for Savage at the time, and he was kind of rushing to get this pistol developed in time for the trials, and just barely made it. In fact, the reason he made it was because the trials were postponed a couple months. At any rate, what he came up with was an 8-round magazine, a rotating barrel locked breech pistol. It was, of course, in .45 caliber. Has a grip safety, has a manual safety, has all of the features that were looked for by the U.S. military, and the pistols actually did reasonably well in trials. Now, they consistently had trouble with broken parts. They weren't quite as reliable as the Colt, and they were definitely not as comfortable to shoot. I've fired a few rounds through one of these, and I would actually pretty much agree with that assessment entirely. They are a heftier recoiling gun. I have a still image from some of the shooting. They spit a lot of fire out. I'm not sure if the locking system on the Savage was entirely as effective as that on the Browning. At any rate, most people are familiar with the fact that Savage made a .45. What I want to discuss specifically today is that there are actually 3 different versions of this pistol. There's a model of 1907, which was made for the original trials. 200 of these were made. Actually, 288 of these were made. These were manufactured, first 200 for the trials, and then a whole bunch of them got lost or destroyed under odd circumstances, and Savage had to produce a bunch of replacement guns. So for a trial of 200, they ended up making 288. Now, after the 1907 trials, the US government came back with a list of requests, some problems, some things they wanted improved, and the result was the model of 1910 Savage .45. Now, the 1910 has only a few changes, and they're pretty much all in the slide. The one change on the frame was the grips. The thin checkered wooden grips were replaced by these thicker flat wooden grips. And then the sight was changed, and the slide was actually made a bit heavier. In total, 15 of these model 1910s were made, and they're not in any specific serial number range. They were actually taken pretty much at random from the bin of 1907 pistols and modified. So you'll find these with serial numbers scattered throughout the range. Then, now the 1910 guns did a little bit better, but they still weren't good enough to beat out Colt. Colt ended up winning the competitions, and Savage actually made one last attempt at getting a pistol adopted, and that was the model of 1911 Savage. Now, only 5 of these were made, and they are entirely built from scratch guns, and they actually have quite a few fairly substantial changes to them. You know, if Savage had started with this pistol, they might have had a better chance at the competition. It still has the recoil issues and the complexity of the previous versions, but it's definitely a more refined gun. So why don't I bring the camera back here, and let's take a closer look at all of these so that we can distinguish the specific details between them all. All right, so we will start by looking at the model of 1907 here. This is, you know, there were 288 of these. They're all pretty much standard. You will find serial numbers for them on the underside of the cocking knob. So this is number 185. The magazines are also numbered. The magazines are numbered on the back. So this is a matching magazine. It is not particularly uncommon to find matching mags. Maybe not quite half, but a lot of these pistols still have matching magazines. And the 1907 had these thin, finely checkered wood grips to it. And actually, an issue we should talk about here is the finish. Now, after Savage failed the trials, it actually bought back pretty much all of the pistols from the US Army so that it could resell them on the commercial market. Now, when it did this, obviously these guns had all been through trials and troop trials, and they were pretty beat up. So Savage refurbished the guns, or at least Savage refurbished most of the guns. So on the military guns, there will be this 2-line address manufactured by Savage Arms Company, Utica, New York, and a patent date, followed by this caliber 45 marking. Now, when Savage got these guns back and refinished them for commercial sale, they actually polished off this 2-line address, and they replaced it, for some reason, it's really not clear why, they replaced it with a 1-line address right here on the barrel cover underneath this rib. So if you see that, a 1-line address here with a caliber 45 marking, that is a Savage refinished commercial sale gun. Now, there were a couple different styles of finish, well, 2 different styles of finish that were used. One is a nice high polished blue like this. You'll also find them with a softer or matte finish. Both of those are correct. Savage did both. All right, so one interesting side note here that will allow you to discern a little bit more about where a specific gun may have been. After the Army testing, Savage bought back virtually all of the 45 caliber pistols. Interestingly, they bought them back as surplus for about 10% of what they'd sold them to the Army for, so kind of a good deal on their part there, although they'd invested certainly plenty of money in the tooling in the first place. Anyway, a lot of these guns were heavily abused from the troop trials, and Savage had to go through and refurbish all of them. That included possibly fixing up the internals when necessary, and they reblued most of the guns. So when they did, it appears that their intention was actually to resell these in bulk to another company. Now that ended up being the Tryon company, and what Savage did as a preparation was they actually polished off their address lines here. So the guns that were sold to Tryon, which were then sold on the commercial market, only have this Cal 45 marking. They don't have Savage's address line. So if you get a gun like this one that does have that 2-line address on the barrel rib, that's a gun that was in the trials and was never subsequently refurbished. Now, in the process, at some point, Savage ended up selling a number of these refurbished guns themselves. Seems like they probably didn't anticipate that, but they got requests. And when they did resell them, they kind of went back and looked and went, well, shoot, we kind of want to have our name on these. So the refurbished guns sold by Savage, they added a single line address down here on the barrel sleeve just below the rib. So, to recap, if you find a gun with the 2-line address up here, it's a non-refurbished original military test gun. If you find a gun with just Cal 45, nothing up here and nothing there, it was a gun that was sold by Tryon on the commercial market after being refinished or refurbished by Savage. And if you find one that has a single address line right here, that's a gun that was refurbished by Savage and then sold by Savage. One of the problems with the Savage in practice is that it has really tiny, kind of useless sights. That's something that will be improved in the 1910 version. Has a grip safety here that wasn't hugely popular. It does work, but it's a little bit of not the greatest design of grip safety from a comfort point of view. These pistols all have lanyard loops, and the magazine release is here in the front of the grip. So on the early guns, you actually push in on the top of the magazine release. It's a double stack 8-round magazine, and in a clever little bit of design, the lanyard loops fold inside the magazine well of the gun. So if you don't want it, it's not there in your way. All right, so if we're going to compare the 1907 to the 1910 models, remember the vast majority of the guns are going to be of this pattern. There are 15 of them that were made in this pattern. The first obvious difference is the grip panels. They are thicker on the 1910 and they are smooth. You will also notice up here the slide has been increased in thickness and weight. Right here on the early guns it comes back, up here it's solid. Now that was in an attempt to increase reliability. I think there were some subtle changes made to some of the internal parts at the same time, but that slide itself is an obvious one. And then the sights were also changed. So the sight itself is actually even smaller on the 1910. However, the notch that you look through is larger. So we do have a better sight picture with the 1910 model. there's that one compared to that. So I think you can see that the 1910 was an improvement in that regard. Beyond that, the pistols are pretty much the same. Not a whole lot of changes made to them. Where we do see a significant change is with the model of 1911. At first glance, it looks the same. It shares the same basic profile, but it really is a significantly different gun. So, looking at some of the features, we have a totally redesigned grip safety. This is much more of the Browning style, as opposed to this little guy. The early guns have a slide release right here that is really small and finicky and difficult to use, and in my opinion, not really worth even having on there. On the 1911 guns, Savage replaced that with, again, a Browning style safety right here, or a magazine, or a bolt release. The safety, the manual safety, has also been changed. On the 1907s, it's this pretty small little thumb rest right there. The 1911 made that significantly larger, gave it some good checkering. Definitely an easier safety to use. The sights on the 1911 are yet larger, so that's actually a halfway decent sight picture, especially for the 1910s. The front sight is also slightly different in style. You can see on the 1907 gun in front here, the front sight blade is pinned on. On the 1911s, it is actually integral to the slide. And on the magazine release, they have reversed it so that instead of pressing on the top, which is potentially something that could be done accidentally while you're shooting, now you press on the bottom in order to remove the magazine. Now, speaking of the magazines, you can see the magazine style is different. There's a reinforcement added to the bottom here, and this pressed-in rib goes all the way to the bottom. I should mention, these are both correct 1907 or 1910 magazines. They were made by the factory, both blued and in the white. Sometimes the in the white ones have blued floor plates. That's all correct and original. And then the 1911 is a rather different style. So something that I think is interesting, just as a side note, is a lot of the changes made to the 1911 Savage 45 kind of mirror some of the changes that were made to the 32 and 380 caliber Savages over their development. So things like the magazine release being changed from a top to a bottom release, that was a change made on the small caliber pistols. Increasing the size of the safety was a change made on the small caliber pistols. The small caliber guns added a grip safety of this style. It's kind of interesting that what Savage did, and cleverly, was use the military contract as a way to finance their development of their 32 and 380 caliber civilian pistols. It seems like they didn't really expect that they had a very good chance of winning this military trial, which is wise of them to have recognized. But they figured it would be good publicity. Maybe they'd win. You certainly don't want to totally discount that possibility. But by selling pistols to the military, they were able to get a little bit of cash flow to help subsidize developing or building the tooling and the machinery to build the pistols for the civilian market. So, clever little tack there on the part of Savage. Since we have a couple of these here, I figure we should probably show you how to disassemble these, and we can take a look at the internals. What you do to disassemble a Savage 45 is actually pretty similar to the small caliber Savages. I'm going to start by locking the slide open. Then what I need to do is pull the slide back about another 1/8 of an inch. I grab the cocking handle and I pull it down, and then I rotate this whole assembly 90 degrees clockwise. So we'll pull the slide back, rotate this, and then this assembly comes out. Now, the rest of this is fairly straightforward. What I need to do is pull the slide off the front of the frame, so I'm going to release the magazine. All right, now the magazine is out, and now I release the mag catch, the hold open, and slowly drop this forward. Once you get the slide to this point, we're going to pull it back. we're going to take out the rear sight and extractor, which are one piece. Pop that down, so pull that guy out. All right, now that that's out, what I'm going to do is pull this back, pull the trigger, back, pull the trigger, drop this forward. Now this will get caught again because I need to rotate the locking lug, or the camming lug, out of the way. Rotate that to the center. Now the slide comes off and the barrel falls out. There is our disassembled Savage 45 automatic. It's interesting to note that this actually has a very simple locking system. In fact, some people might suggest it's barely locked. There is a track right here at the top of the slide, right in front of the barrel. And our barrel has one locking lug that holds it into the frame, and then it has this camming lug. This lug runs in that track and causes the barrel to simply rotate after the slide has moved back about a 1/4 inch. That unlocks the slide, and then it can continue to run in that track straight out the end of the slide. So pretty simple pseudo locking system in there. It is also a bit clever that we have one piece here that is used as the extractor and the rear sight. That's a neat, efficient use of material. This is a piece of spring steel in between them. The downside is that this piece kind of falls out when you're trying to reassemble the gun, and it's a little bit finicky. This is also the sort of loose part that you don't want in a military pistol. Now, looking at the inside of the frame, we have our grip safety right here. When I push in the tab on the outside, that drops, which allows the gun to cycle or to fire. And then we also have an out of battery safety up here. This is the trigger bar, and it has to be held down. Spring tension is pushing it up. If the slide is not in battery and holding this bar down, it doesn't fire when you push back. So just a basic mechanical safety there. And that's pretty much it for the Savage frame. Now, reassembly is a little bit finicky. What we are going to do is hold the trigger down. We're going to put the barrel in its lug right there, and then I'm going to put the slide on. We can run this forward. Once we get it to this point, we want to cam the barrel over that way. Now, that camming lug will fit in its recess in the barrel there. Now, I need to lock the slide all the way back. Once the slide is back, then I can reinsert my rear sight / ejector or extractor. There we go. Got that in there. Then the last and usually the trickiest bit, I'm going to put the hammer assembly in, rotated 90 degrees, push it all the way in while holding the cocking knob down, and then rotate it back into position. While I do this, however, I have to have the slide pulled back about an extra 1/8 of an inch. So there we go. Gun is reassembled. Once I drop the magazine, we can now cycle it, and we're good to go. One reassembled Savage 45 automatic pistol. Well, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something about distinguishing between the 3 different versions of Savage 45. So next time you see one of those in a display or a museum or an auction, you'll be able to tell exactly what kind of gun it is and what it was used for. Thanks for watching. Tune in again to ForgottenWeapons.com for more Trials automatic pistols.